a lot of education on native plants and native plants in a variety of different locations. We talk about meadows as well, and planting them in open spaces. For those who are not familiar, native plants are plants that evolved in this ecosystem, that evolved, or wherever your ecosystem is. They're plants that really grew up over the millennia in that soil, in that atmosphere with those animals. And so plants that are not native often are invasive, not always, but some of them, can really take over. Some of the worst in our area are plants that are still actually sold by nurseries, like butterfly bush, burning bush, privet, and you can see them really taking over woodland areas, which is not what we want. We want the woodlands to be as native as possible, and really kind of continue with that ecosystem, because that's what the animals need, and that's what our whole ecosystem needs. And so today we are going to focus on the aspect specifically of woodland gardens, as opposed to other type of native plantings. So what really is the whole point? Whoops, we are backwards. Come on. All right. What's the whole point kind of natives? Why does it matter so much? And really, it comes back to the ecosystem. It comes back to everyone needing to eat. Almost everything that we eat either has to be pollinated, or it itself eats something that has to be pollinated. And so without pollinators, we don't eat. What are pollinators? Pollinators are bees, butterflies, also hummingbirds, moths, bats, many different types of animals pollinate. But one of the most key in the food chain is caterpillars. Caterpillars are really the lowest source of protein in the food chain. And they are super important. Birds need caterpillars. Animals that eat birds need the birds who need the caterpillars. You will see for those of you who feed birds, you may see around nesting time that the birds kind of disappear from the feeders. And the reason for that is that their food preferences are changing at that time. Birds who are normally seed eaters or fruit eaters, they're pretty much all concentrating on protein at that time of year to feed their fledglings. And again, the easiest source of protein is caterpillars. So caterpillars need to be fed, and need to be able to procreate. And the slides are a little bit back. The caterpillars need native plants. Why? They're fussy eaters. So the example that I mentioned earlier of the non-native invasive, the butterfly bush, you often will see loads and loads of beautiful adult butterflies on it. They'll look fantastic. They'll be super happy. And yes, the adults will pretty much drink nectar from almost anything. But I call it the bait and switch bush, because they will then lay the eggs, and the caterpillars, the butterfly larvae, have evolved over generations to eat the things that are from their ecosystem, the plants. So if the egg hatches on a butterfly bush, then the caterpillar is going to starve because it doesn't have time to adjust. If your kids won't eat spinach, you've got years and all kinds of ways to educate them, and to change that. Whereas the caterpillars, their life cycle is very short, often just a few weeks before they are getting ready to become a butterfly. And so if they can't find the food they need, they will just starve, and you will not get the next generation. So many of them need what are called native host plants. So they have evolved not just to eat a native plant, but to eat a specific class of native plants. So the most common for that is monarchs, or most commonly known is monarchs and milkweed. A lot of people know that monarchs really need milkweed, which is a native in our areas, in order to survive. This particular caterpillar is one of my favorites. It's a spicebush swallowtail caterpillar, and it is on a spicebush. They're very cool animals, and I feel like it's worth having spice bushes just to get these guys. And spice bushes are a wonderful woodland plant. When they are first hatched from the eggs, they look kind of like butterfly. They look kind of like bird droppings, which is a camouflage. They want the predators to think that they are not edible, that they are just a bird dropping. And later in their later instars, after they've evolved, this guy is very close to becoming a butterfly. They try to mimic snakes, so he's in his snake phase. And later, Jennifer is going to show you an actual snake, so you can see whether this guy's doing a good job of pretending to be a snake. He will be even more dramatic right before he goes into his cocoon. He will be orange. So that's really fun. And this is just an example of what you can get with native plants. You get this amazing caterpillar, and you, of course, get the butterfly that it will eventually become. Okay, so why woods? Why do woods matter so much? Why is that a particularly important native habitat? So there are a lot of reasons why woods matter environmentally. Obviously, trees provide the best erosion control. They are fantastic carbon sinks. But today we're focusing on the habitat value. Why woods provide the best habitat for native wildlife. What is habitat? Habitat is food and shelter. The same as we need houses and we need food. And habitat for native animals is being increasingly threatened. So if you think about it, like, you know, many of us in the world right now are, you know, facing increasing housing costs, increasing food costs, and that is making it more difficult. You know, and in you know, only people with more money, with more resources can survive. This happens with the animals too, that only the animals with more resources can survive. And you often get some of the more vulnerable species that get pushed out if they do not have enough habitat. So woods really creates everything that many native wild animals need for habitat. Food and water. Water is really key, fresh water to drink. Many woods, like the woods behind me, which is some of my personal woods, actually have a water source, a running creek or a pond, or are along the side of a river. That's absolutely essential. Lots of different kind of food, like native plants. The mayapple in the lower photo is an example of that. And Jennifer's going to show you later someone who eats a mayapple. It's a great plant for box turtles because it's about their height. It's a little sort of fairy umbrella type of thing, and provides food that they can eat. That flower that you see will later in the summer will turn into a little fruit that they can eat. And this is a woodland plant. It also provides, you know, the woods provide shelter. They provide housing. The animals shown here are two of my favorite woodland neighbors, wood turtle, which is endangered and is only present in a few counties in Virginia. And this is one of my wood turtles. And, you know, it lives along the creeks and really needs the habitat and uses the undergrowth for shelter. The bird is a pileated woodpecker. Again, one of my favorite birds. They really depend on large swathes of woodland. They depend on old trees. They depend on dead trees. That is where they get their food source, from bugs that are living in the dead trees. And they hollow it out, as you can see, to make nests for their young. Without those dead trees, without the woods, you have no pileatids. I grew up in an area in Massachusetts that was rural, but gradually suburbanizing. And we had a, you know, my parents loved birds, and we had the bird book, and we were identifying everything. And once, just once, my whole childhood, my mother and I saw pileated woodpecker. They are enormous. They are sort of the original woody woodpecker, probably 10 foot the size of a downy woodpecker. And we were so excited, and we did everything we could to keep that woodpecker, but we couldn't because we didn't have enough woods around. It was a suburban area and the habitat had disappeared. It needed more space. It needed more resources than we could provide. So in your woods, you may not be able, if you have a small area, to attract everyone, but you can try to provide habitat for as many animals as you can and really make it as comfortable as possible for them. First thing is get to know your woods. And this applies, by the way, even if you don't have woods yet, because you have to get to know your land. And if you're thinking of putting in woods or putting in a micro woodland, you want to know what will work on your property. There are several things that you need to know about your woods. This is my woods, or was my woods when I first bought the property. And those are mayaples. Actually, you can see that they grow in kind of great clouds early in the spring. My woods, this particular woodland, is a frustrating mix, as many of yours may be, of native plants and invasive plants. A lot of those green bushes in the background are invasives. They are multiflora rose. They've probably got Japanese honeysuckle climbing on them, but there are also some wonderful native understory trees in there, viburnums and spice bushes and trees. So you need to really identify what's there before you start and figure out, what you want to protect and what you maybe need to get rid of. Also, you want to know how old your woodland is. Mine is not old. My land is in an area that was primarily grazed, and it was cleared for grazing, and it was only allowed to reforest starting in the 1980s. So most, with the exception of one 250-year-old oak tree that was preserved as a boundary tree because it marked the border of two farms, most of the trees in my woodland are 60 years old or much younger. Some woodlands may be even younger, maybe what's called early successional, early establishment of woodlands. And it's important to know that as your woodland ages and stage. How big is your woodland? And what's around it? Are you the only woods for miles, or is it adjoining your neighbors? If it's adjoining your neighbors, is his or her or their woods full of invasives? What's over there? Does it adjoin farmland? Does it adjoin a water source? Elevation, how high up is it? How much light does it get? Some woodlands are very dense. Some are more sparser, and you get a fair amount of what's called dappled shade. So some light entering in, which affects the type of plants that want to grow there. What kind of soil do you have? And what woodland type do you have? So woodlands are often classified in types. Mine is a oak hickory type, which means that those are the dominant tall overstory trees. What determines a woodland type often has to do with soil pH. It has to do not just with the soil chemistry, but with the geology, what kind of rock your is on, what your climate is at, what your elevation is in. So actually Blue Ridge Wildlife Center's woods, where we're doing the woodland garden, is not too far from mine, but geographically, but it is a totally different woodland type. Their soil is acidic. Mine is neutral to alkaline. So a sign that yours might be acidic is if you have a lot of mountain laurel or wild blueberry or dogwoods in the understory, that's pretty much acidic. I don't have those because mine is more alkaline, and most of the oak hickory woods will not have those. So get to know your woods. And if you don't have woods, still you want to get to know what is your soil type. You can do a soil test through extension or through the local ag supply stores will often do them. And that helps you know what your soil pH is, how fertile it is. Most woodland plants want pretty fertile soil. And you certainly can tell whether your soil is fairly wet and how much light you're getting, etc. Know your woodland throughout the seasons as well. And if you are starting a woodland, plan your woodland throughout the seasons. That is really important. Animals are active at different times of the year, particularly pollinators. Some pollinators are active literally only for a few weeks of the year. And you want something for all of the creatures, whether they are good insects or mammals or birds, you want something for them to eat and shelter in at all seasons. So you'll see kind of the woodlands around here will rotate right now. Spring ephemerals are in bloom. The Virginia bluebell is the classic one around here that everybody loves and everybody recognizes. Spring ephemeral is pretty much what it sounds like. It is ephemeral. It is not there all the time. It comes up in the early spring before the trees have leafed out. When it gets a lot more light, it blooms and then it senesces. So it dies back for the season, but it's a perennial. It will come back the next year in the same way. And those are some of the most precious woodland flowers and things that you really, really want to cherish. You do still want things that are blooming at different times of the year, though. Phlox will bloom later. Woodland sunflower, the yellow flower shown here, and you can see a little pollinator perching on it, blooms much later. It blooms in the summer, and that's something that it's important to have that. Some of the woodland grasses, like Virginia wild rye, are more active during certain seasons. The fall and the summer, also you get some fruit. You get some, berries that are fruiting in the summer. In the fall, you have some wonderful fruiting woodland trees, like the persimmon shown here. There are native persimmons up here, and if you're out here and you're foraging for yourself and you've tasted a persimmon, you will know if you tasted it at the wrong time of year. You basically have to wait till the frost hits it once or twice, and it gets much sweeter. It can really be very unpleasant earlier in the year, but it's fantastic, sort of around Thanksgiving time, which is in November. And pawpaws are wonderful trees that we'll talk about in a minute. But these provide food. The seeds provide food for the animals later into the season. Okay, woodlands have a structure like most gardens, but particularly woodlands because they are more vertical than, say, a meadow. So woodlands have both vertical layers and sort of more horizontal layers as they spread outwards. As you're building a woodland and also as you're identifying what's in your current woods, it's really important to consider the layers. The overstory is your big trees, your oaks, your walnuts, your, whatever your really huge trees are in your woodland. Your understory is pretty much your bushes and small trees. These to me are the most interesting because there's a huge amount of variation in biodiversity. Many of them flower, many of them fruit, interestingly, and we'll talk toward the end about some fun understory trees that you might want to introduce. Again, your understory trees are going to depend on your woodland type, your soil type. For those who can grow spice bush, as I've already mentioned, one of my favorites, it's called Appalachian allspice because pretty much all parts of it are edible. The berries can be used like allspice berries, but this is it blooming around now. It is actually blooming now. It blooms around the same time as forsythia, but unlike forsythia, it is a native and it will bloom in deep shade. So you get if you have a wood full of spice bushes, you get kind of a cloud of yellow before the trees leaf out in your understory. And the twigs are edible. You can make a wonderful early season tea out of them. The flowers have a gentle floral flavor that's great in salads. And and of course you get the really cool caterpillars. So there are all kinds of interesting stories, the red buds, dogwoods, hazelnuts. You can kind of spend ages with those. Then you have the perennials, which, the ephemerals are perennials, the spring ephemerals are perennials. There are also some that really that either bloom at different times of the year or that really last throughout the year and become a ground cover. So golden ragwort, this yellow flowering thing, is one of my favorites. It is pretty much evergreen in many areas. It's got low, kind of rounded green leaves, and it's getting ready to bloom right now. So in my area, in a week or two, it'll probably come up with these yellow flowers, but most of the time it's flat, it's low to the ground. It is extremely aggressive. So it is great at outcompeting invasives that are trying to take over your woods, in part because it's evergreen. if something's evergreen, it will have a much better chance against invasives. Wild ginger is another favorite. It's a great purpose of aves, and it has little tiny red, deep red flower in the spring that is almost hidden under the leaves, and it is pollinated by ants. So, ants spread the seeds. So if you have wild ginger and you want more wild ginger, be good to your ants. They are part of the ecosystem too, and they are moving wild ginger seeds around for you. Okay, so we also have, as I said, some oops, all right, the slides are very sticky today. We have some horizontal layers, which essentially the woodland spreads outward, and woodland edges are almost a totally different habitat. And often attract a different type of animals, like Sustainability Matters signature bird, the cardinal, which is also the bird of loves woodland edges. Some animals kind of want more light. They want to be able to get into the fields or into open areas, but they also want somewhere safe to retreat to. So you want to think about the edges of your woodland and what type of plants will do well there. Some trees like redbuds which are about to bloom, and in some areas of Virginia are blooming already. Fabulous hot pink flowers, as you see here. They like a bit of sun, so they like to be at woodland edges. Dogwoods also tend to prefer that. They will grow deeper in the woods, but they definitely prefer the dappled shade of woodland edges. A lot of different kinds of berries want a bit of light. And some of the late flowering perennials. So like the woodland sunflower that I showed you a couple slides ago, that is more of a woodland edge rather than a deep woodland flower, because it does need some light. And then here is one of my fairly new favorites, bear's foot, which I've discovered at my woodland edges. It is a gigantic plant. You can see from the hand on the leaf how big these things are. They grow up to 10 feet high in these huge colonies at the end. When I first discovered them on my property, I thought, oh my gosh, this must be some crazy new invasive, because it was so aggressive and it was colonizing disturbed areas. It turned out to be a native. And again, like the woodland sunflower, it blooms late in the year. So it's great for later season pollinators and woodland dwellers, and just a very aggressive plant, but a lot of fun. So that's an example of something interesting that you can get at the woodland edge. Woodland hygiene. America has pretty much, we've been taught to love lawns. We've been taught to love tidy gardens, that if your garden looks neat, you're taking good care of it. That is generally not the case environmentally. Our flagship sustainable landscaping education programs are actually called Greener Than Grass, and they're about getting people to replace their lawns with something more environmentally friendly, because lawns are a desert environmentally. There's really nothing there. Neat gardens, you're taking away so much that the environment needs. You're taking away leaves that could enrich your soil. You're taking away seeds that birds could eat. You're taking away winter habitat for beneficial insects that nest on dried stems or overwinter in hollow dried stems. If you really want an environmentally friendly woodland, you have to embrace the chaos that is the woods. Because if you clean up, you are just probably destroying someone's home. And so for the salamander that you see there, is somebody I found when I was cleaning out a window well that's pretty close to a little woodland on the other side of my driveway. It was full of dried leaves, and the salamander was living there. So of course I put the dried leaves back and the salamander back, and he got to keep his home. But I think about that. In every pile of leaves, someone is living. So leave the leaves, which also enrich the soil in the woodland. Part of why forests have the best soil. It is the richest soil, and that's because of the leaf litter. Leaf litter is sold as compost, broken down and sold in big box stores as compost. It does make the best compost. It really, it decomposes, it enriches the soil. The wood of fallen trees decomposes and enriches the soil, and is the best thing that you can really do to add nitrogen to the soil. The logs, again, are homes. Dead trees, which are called snags, are homes for all kinds of animals that nest in hollow trees. If you are concerned about branches falling, then you can always do this. Example is from the State Arboretum, from the Virginia State Arboretum, Blandy. This is their woodland walk. It is an area where many people walk, where they do public tours. We do wild edibles walks and tree ID walks there. So they can't have, dead limbs left to fall on people. So what they did was they limbed up this tree, but they left the part that was the most important for animals to live in. And they even added a little mailbox birdhouse on the top. So get creative. You can do something like this too. If you are clearing brush, pile it up. Make a brush pile. Brush piles are wonderful habitat. In general, you want to go high and not, you can go wide too with your brush pile, but make sure it's fairly high because there's various layers. So this is one of my brush piles, and it has probably about 20 different entrances. I have no idea how many residents it has or how many different species, because I see all kinds of birds and other animals coming out of it at all times of day. I originally kind of put it there and I thought, okay, well, let it rot down. But I keep adding to it, and I keep seeing more and more animals living in it. And it's a wonderful thing to watch. So you have to, in a sense, adjust your aesthetic, I would say, and realize that you are not the only one who lives on your property. You're not the only one who uses your woods, and you want to really create the habitat that these animals need, and then you get to enjoy seeing the animals and knowing what you're doing for them and for your environment. So, okay, what about those of you who don't have woods? What are you supposed to do? You can work on making a micro woodland. Of course, you can also work on making a macro woodland if you have, huge fields that you're not using, that you to convert and you want to reforest them. That is absolutely something we would encourage you to do. And your Department of Forestry and other state and federal agencies will work with you on that. We even run a series of webinars called Get Paid to Go Green, which shows how you can get funding for projects like that. But for those of you who are on less than an acre and, creating a giant woodland is not really an option, try to create some level of woodland garden, your micro woodland. First thing to look at is, do you have any shade? That would help you start. Is there a shady side of your house? Is there even a shady fence that between your property and somebody else's that you can use for some shade loving plants? If there is, don't despair. Start at the top. Start with your big shade tree. Decide what you're going to plant. You might say choose an oak. If you do choose an oak, make sure you have enough space for it. Plan well. Make sure that that you have enough space for these trees. Some of these woodland trees get very, very large. You can research what their mature sizes are and bear in mind that eventually it'll probably get even bigger than that. You do not want the hassle of taking down a giant tree next to your house or having the future owner of your house want to do that. But you can manage with, smaller trees as well. This frog is Frances. Frances does not live in the woods. Frances lives next to my garage. She lives under a big holly tree that is there. And she, I believe, eats a lot of crickets. Eats a lot of other, lots of bugs, keeps my garage bug population at minimum. And she has never really shown any particular interest in moving into the woods. She just meanders around and clearly finds enough food and enough shade and enough habitat. She's shown here sitting in one of her water dishes, because she does not, as far as I know, go down to the creeks. And a lot of you may not have creeks on your property, but it is important to provide fresh, clean water for these animals. So just like you would provide a bird bath for birds at their level, For toads and frogs, who are super important natural pest control, you want them on your property. Make sure that you provide a water source, which can just be, this is just a shallow dish full of clean water that I change regularly. A pie plate can work, something that they can get into and stay cool in, can drink. Um, and yeah, and so like I said, you can create this really under any tree if you have a big tree on your property or even a medium-sized tree. You can start also with planting some of the understory trees underneath that and create a whole habitat, and eventually move toward having some of the woodland perennials, maybe even the woodland ephemerals. You do want to be careful about your soil. The woodland ephemerals in particular, the spring ephemerals like Virginia bluebells, like bloodroot, they're fussy about soil. They really have evolved often for wet soil and definitely for good soil, forest, rich forest soil. So again, do a soil test. If your soil is terrible, you do not, and you have full sun right now, you do not want to plant these things right away. They will die. But you can build towards it. You could plant, for example, a button bush, like the one right behind Sonia, because button bushes will do well in both shade and sun. And you could also plant, say, an oak next to the button bush, which will eventually grow up and it will shade the button bush, but the button bush will still be fine and it will flower. And in the meantime, keep working on that soil. Compost. If you don't know how to compost, we run a lot of programs on composting. Deb Abercrombie, who today is teaching one at the State Arboretum this week. We have some, or next month, sorry. We have some composting webinars that are actually on our Facebook already, and a composting for the tools Facebook group. No leaf litter, no dead plant parts, no grass clippings should ever leave your property, no food waste. That can be used to enrich your soil. Compost it, add it to your soil, and eventually your soil will become the kind of rich soil. And if you've created the kind of shade that you need, you can put your woodland ephemerals in. In the meantime, plan some succession plants. You might want to put in some annuals that are pollinator friendly while you sun. And plan for over the years of how your micro woodland is going to develop. And you'll be surprised, if you plan well, you'll be surprised at how quickly it will grow. We'll get there. So some of my favorites, and I have so many favorites, and there are so many plants that we would be here all night if I went through all of my favorite plants. And some of these for you will not be native to your area, so you always want to research what is native to your area. But these are some great opportunities. So these are some of my favorite woodland trees and shrubs. Hackberry, I love for its bark. It also is a wonderful wildlife tree because it produces berries that they eat. They're pretty tiny and not super exciting from a human perspective, but the bark is just really cool. And it can get to be a decent, pretty tall tree. Also on the tree front, some to really highlight are the ones that host the most biodiversity. There is an entomologist from the University of Delaware, Doug Tallamy, who really helped popularize the notion of habitat at home, of kind of creating, using this metaphor of a patchwork quilt, where, even if you are the only habitat, the only pollinator habitat, the only native habitat in your neighborhood, if a few streets away, maybe somebody else has done it too, that is a start. That creates space for pollinators to buzz from one, your yard to somebody else's. And he and his students came up with a list of the plants that host the most biodiversity, measured in species of caterpillars, because as we talked about earlier, caterpillars are super important. And what they found was that the trees that hosted the most different species of caterpillars by far were oak and black cherry. And the oak is a family of many different trees. If you have space for one, I would definitely encourage planting it. And black cherry is a fun one. It does have edible tiny cherries, but they're great. I make them into liqueur. Some people make jam from them, and they're wonderful for wildlife as well. The other trees shown here are more understory trees. They are more smaller ones. Witch hazel is a great one because it blooms late. When all of the leaves are off the trees in November, December, you will actually get these blooms. And we always see witch hazel blooming at the State Arboretum on our winter tree ID walk, which is usually mid-December. Pawpaw, lots of fun. It is a wonderful native fruit. It is the largest native fruit in our region. You can see by the hand what size it is. It's pretty much mango sized. Interesting flavor. I would say kind of a cross between a banana and a pear. A little bit hard to get it to pollinate. You need at least 2 pawpaw trees from different stocks to do it. They also are a little bit fussy. So as with any tree, with any plant, research growing conditions. Pawpaws like some water. But if they are happy in your area, they will really spread. And they are fairly deer resistant, which is an issue for everybody. Spice bushes also fairly deer resistant. I have very aggressive deer. I have a lot of spice bushes. The two are not unconnected. So, pressure is an issue for you. You do want to focus on at least some native trees that are relatively deer resistant. And again, there's nothing that's perfectly deer resistant. One of my tree favorites is the American bladdernut, which is a small tree. And again, a recent discovery for me. I was actually down along my creek, walking the property with our local forester, and he had never seen this tree before either. And it was a little bit earlier than blueberries will bloom. But we thought, God, this thing looks like a blueberry, and it almost has blueberry-like flowers, but it is not a blueberry, and it does not make berries. It makes nuts, little tiny nuts that end up in a big kind of almost Chinese lantern type husk with a tiny nut inside. It's kind of a fun little trail snack, but it also just looks really cool because it hangs on the tree. Like mine they're just starting to leaf out. They haven't flowered yet, but you can still see the husks hanging from last year, and it adds some winter interest and again, some food for the birds and the other animals in the middle of the winter. So that's a favorite that I would recommend. Again, that's one that likes water. It grows, in fact, along the creek that you see behind me. So just some favorites from the understory, and these are all blooming now. So these are all spring ephemerals that you can see. One of my favorites, in part because of its name, actually, and it's not blooming quite yet, it will be in a few weeks, is the toadshade, which is a type of trillium. There are other types of trilliums in other colors. This is the one that I happen to have. Bloodroot is one of the earliest. Beautiful white flower, very cool, interestingly shaped leaves. Trout lily is blooming now for me. There are different colors of trout lily. Mine happen to be the yellow ones. I love them. They've got these great mottled leaves as well. Spring beauty is a really interesting one. It's very, very kind of quiet, not very prepossessing flower. It's not going to be in your face like trout lily or the toadshade is. But it is an example of why habitat is so important and why native plants are so important, because caterpillars, butterflies are not the only pollinators that have particular host species. Spring beauty is the host for the spring beauty mining bee, which only pollinates spring beauty. And it is only active for a few weeks of the year when the spring beauty is blooming, which is now. So if you want to see those bees, get out in the woods and look for spring bee, usually in the middle of the day. I think they're more active during the heat of the day or what passes for heat at this time of year, when the flowers are really open. But this is an example, without this flower, we would not have that bee. And there are many other examples like that. The speckled violet is a little bit of a cheat. It is what is called a nativar. So a nativar is a cultivar, so something that has basically been bred by humans out of a native. So it has been demonstrated that nativars aren't quite as useful to wildlife and pollinators as the pure native. So some examples of nativars are like those neon cone flowers that you will see in big box stores, or the forest pansy redbud, which is still a redbud, but it has deep purple leaves. These are not terrible things. You know, if you have a very small area, I would encourage you to go with the straight natives, but you know, I have a forest pansy redbud because it's just really beautiful. And, you know, I also have dozens of regular redbud, native buds. So the speckled violet is, you know, it's a form of a violet, and it's just extremely cool. You know, a lot of people are trying to get rid of violets from their, but they are edible by humans. They actually taste really good. There are many different kinds of native violets, and they make a wonderful ground cover too. You know, let them spread in your flower beds. You won't have to mulch. You won't need a lawn. You won't need the grass, and you'll have beautiful flowers. So, you know, I would definitely encourage you to really jump into researching what's native in your area. If there's particular animals that you want to attract or host, you know, what they need in terms of their habitat, and, you know, just kind of get involved in the wonderful adventure that is native wood gardening. Um, we also hope that you will get involved in other adventures with Sustainability Matters. We host a lot of different programs. Our focus is really providing concrete information that individuals can use, whether you are, you know, a homeowner or a farmer. You know, we work a lot with farmers, helping them work conservation strategies into sustainable farming and get funding for that. And you know, we want people to really be able to make a difference with what they are doing with their lives, not necessarily wait for the politicians to change the rules or change the laws, but know that you can go out and you can plant a tree or a perennial and make a difference to the world. So some stuff for, I think, for this crowd to check out, and I would encourage you to check out our website in general, and our social media and our programs. And I'm sure the Zoom team has been putting that in the chat all along. But something that might be fun is on our YouTube, there is a series of videos, Native Virginia Now, made by a couple of landowners here, showing their native habitat throughout the seasons. They have one episode on woodland ephemerals as well. They're a lot of fun. This is not your grandmother's nature video. They have lifestyle tips. They have fans in Manhattan who are never going to have pollinator meadows just because they are fun. We joke that they're kind of the Martha Stewart of native plants now. We also have a program called Making Trash Bloom. One of the things that we really focus on is bringing conservation to unexpected places, and Making Trash Bloom brings native meadows to landfills. So, you know, what would normally be planted with grass and be useless space, toxic land that can't be built on or used for other purposes. So this is a program that has piloted in Shenandoah County in Virginia and is expanding this year to Rappahannock County and to Fairfax County, across a wide range of demographics. And we use it as a springboard for public education, actually held at the Dome. So that's else that we do. Greener Than Grass, as I mentioned, our sustainable landscaping education. Again, on our YouTube, you can watch our recent Greener Than Grass webinar. We hold them again in various formats at different times throughout the year. Before I turn it over to the adorable animals and Jennifer telling you about the adorable animals, do we have any quick questions that the Zoom team wasn't able to get to? Everything's been answered. It's fantastic. Our volunteers are the best.
One of our current questions on the board is, how do you work with landowners who feel that property values are dependent on keeping everything neat?
That is an excellent question. And I actually gave a talk last week at a local retirement community, which was focused primarily on that. What do you do, you know, when you have to worry about what the neighbors say? It's a tough call. You know, we are working with localities to HOAs to really change the definition of what quote unquote looks good. Sometimes you have to make compromises because of what the neighbor thinks or what the HOA says. By all means, try to educate them, get them to watch our there's involved, data, but also, try to make it look, I hate to use the word pretty, but try to make it look as pretty as possible. If you're doing edible landscaping, choose attractive edibles. If you are doing landscaping for pollinators, choose stuff that flowers beautifully. You probably do have to keep it neater than, maybe environmental priorities would dictate. Some homeowners have even put up signs, to educate people about it. Audubon has a program where they'll certify your pollinator habitat, your bird habitat, and then you have a little bit of outside endorsement. But unfortunately, it's going to be a series of compromises. We would strongly encourage you, if the neighbors are all friendly, to talk to them about it and educate them. But yeah, you're gonna have to pick the prettiest, for lack of a better word, plants that you can, and maybe keep them tidier than you might choose to. Lauren, I know you had a question, I think, or a question that you were relaying from somebody, right?
It was the same one, but I can go on to another, which is Deborah was asking, we're interested in trying some winged sumac in a very sunny spot of open woods. Does anyone have experience with this plant?
I don't personally. I grow staghorn sumac, which loves sunny areas, but I have not tried winged sumac. Does anyone, Nan, are you familiar with it? Or Natalie?
I'm not.
Okay, we have struck out on winged sumac. Maybe somebody in our large audience will know about winged sumac, however, and feel free to pipe up in the Q&A in the chat. But I would also suggest, your local Native Plant Society may have some thoughts on that, or other sources.
We do have some questions from Facebook.
Okay.
From Lee Yi. There's actually a couple of questions. So this person was wondering about recommendations for evergreen bushes.
That is a good question. And, evergreens are something that is really important for habitat, because they provide a lot more shelter and camouflage in the winter that others do not. Out in our area, particularly in a woodland setting, I would definitely recommend American holly. And that's wonderful and provides berries, obviously, animals. There are not a lot of conifers that do well in woodland shade. The eastern white pine can manage. Red cedar, which is actually not a cedar, it is actually a juniper, in our area, grows well on woodland edges. So that's an option. And if you have full sun, you have a lot more options of a lot of different pine trees. Again, I would keep in mind, though, that many of them get quite large. So.
There was another question about attracting predators, which I think maybe we'll get to more in the animals section of the program, so we'll hold off on that. But then the third question was, why are redbud trees so much more common than dogwoods in the Shenandoah Valley? That's
a really good question. And I'm not sure that I thought about the fact that they are, but I think that's true. My educated guess on that would be soil type. That redbuds are more versatile where they will grow. They will grow in different soil, whereas dogwoods really like pretty acidic soil. So that's my best guess. Anything else before we turn it over to the animals, the wild ones? Okay, well, Jennifer, we will let you and your winged and scaled and otherwise orange friends take it away and tell us about their experiences living in the woodland and what they want you to grow for them.
Yeah, thank you. It was a really great talk. I enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, our animals that we're going to talk about today, they all came out of the wild, but are non-releasable for one reason or another. Let me see if I can. No, all right. I was trying to make myself bigger so I can see, make sure you guys see very well. So I'll probably be moving the camera around a little bit so you guys can get really good views on everybody that that we pull out. So one of the things that you know, kind of connects this chat with what we do is obviously nothing happens in a bubble. I saw somewhere in there that somebody, one of their question was, I love berries, but what do you do about bears? Nothing you can do. If you want the berries, you're gonna bring the bears in, and you're gonna have to live with those wild neighbors. So that's one of the education themes that we try to touch on a lot, whether we're talking to young stewards or people who are just learning about natives. The plant and the animal life goes together. It's interlinked. If you are building a woodland, if you build it, they will come. You will get those frogs. You will get all the way from tiny little slugs all the way up to some of the larger animals. Whatever you put down, you have to be aware that you are going to get the animals that like to eat those and live there and put their babies there. And we can be a really great resource for that as you're going through. If you find animals that are injured, if you have questions about animal behavior that you're seeing. If you live here in Virginia, we are a Virginia-based organization, so that's where our expertise is going to be. But if you have those kinds of questions, you're welcome to reach out to us, and we'll guide you as well as we can as you go through. So our first friend that we're going to meet, very small, go ahead and put this down a little bit. This is Sheldon. And Sheldon is an eastern box turtle. He's our male eastern box turtle that we have here at the center. These guys are a land tortoise, obviously, with his high shell and his long feet. They do not generally travel very far, so they like to pick spaces that work for them, and then they will stay there their entire lives, which in the wild could be anywhere between 40 and 60 years, if not older, if they live in a really good area. This might be an animal that is difficult to attract into an area. Their greatest threat at the moment is habitat fragmentation. So finding those safe pathways to go from where they currently are to this beautiful new habitat that you're building. So if you are creating a habitat in your backyard that has a fence, you're not going to draw these guys in. It takes a lot for them to get to where they're born, to where they go. They are hatched independent. They're about the size of a quarter. They don't move very fast. They don't move very far, but they're excellent wild neighbors to have. Not only are they going to dine on some of your plants, so be prepared for that, but they do eat a lot of insects, especially when they're younger. When they're small and it's really difficult for them to find bite-sized food, they are going to eat a lot of garden pests. They're going to keep slugs and some beetles and things down in your gardens. These guys are a really good neighbor to have. Again, if anything happens, whenever you guys are out gardening, if you are creating woodland or if you are renovating a space that you already have, do be aware that you might have wildlife living there already. So make sure that you keep an eye out for animals like these. They look like rocks, and one of their ways that they try to keep themselves safe is to pull themselves into their shell. So I don't think he'll do it. He's a bit of an action turtle, but they have a little bit. They have a specialized hinge here on the bottom part of their shell that allows them to close this plate. They have a big muscle behind there, and they can pull the whole thing closed. Honestly, one of our greatest banes is lawn culture, because most people don't look for turtles before they go about mowing their lawns, and they mow over bunny nests and bird nests and turtles, and they get hit by lawnmowers and they end up with shell fractures that most of the time we are able to repair, but some of them can be pretty damaging. So whenever you guys are doing any kind of renovations, just make sure that you are paying attention to those animals that might already be living there. So Sheldon here, he's been with us since, oh gosh, now I've forgotten. He's been with us since 2014, I believe. He's been with us for quite a while. He was unfortunately abducted. So somebody well-meaning, but they found him crossing a road, and they thought they could help him better by taking them to their backyard and keeping him permanently. He was not happy in that backyard. So he ended up malnourished and very lethargic, and was eventually brought into us. So if you do find a turtle, you can guess how old they are by counting the rings on the shell. I'm a little closer. I'm not sure if you can see the texture of his shell in there, but you'll see these kind of rings, kind of like the rings of a tree. And you can start in the middle and count your way out. These guys usually hit their adult age between 25 and 30. They're full adult age and size at about that old. And so that should be about how many rings that you count. And then there are sometimes other ways. Older turtles can be darker. Their rings can be smoother and worn down. So he's probably somewhere in his 30s. He's still fairly young for a turtle. And in captivity, they can live to be over 100. So we actually have here on property, he spends his winters indoors in an enclosure that we try to change up quite often for him. But he does have a bit of a summer pad. We created a turtle pond here at the center. So we created our own little mini habitat. It is full of natives, and we have our own frogs that have moved in. We have right now, there's about 6 green frogs that are living in there. Which is a huge increase. Last year we had 1. So either he found friends or he made friends. Either way, but he gets to go out there, and it is full of natives. And I know that Sari mentioned May apple, which is a big deal for these guys. Not so much for him because he's spoiled. And they don't eat the natives that we put outside for them because they know that there's junk food to eat inside the diet that we have. It's got tomatoes and strawberries, and why would they work to eat natives when they can have gourmet food when they come back in? But they do like to hide in it and dig around. It is all that kind of low-level stuff. I've seen great pictures of him peeking out behind foliage. So this dappled kind of color is typical of the box turtle. And this is really good camouflage. They do like to hide in leaf litter, and sunlight coming in through the overstory, through the canopy, and hitting against this is a really good way for them to blend into the forest floor. So while you're out and about building your forest, just keep an eye on where you're walking and what you're doing. Oh, I know. Speaking of forest floors, kind of halfway, we do have our next guest. So this is our eastern rat snake. This is Slim. He is very confused. It is very late at night for him. But these guys are a snake you're going to find not only on the ground, but also in trees. These guys are big forest dwellers. And a big thing to remember for them is anything you set up, same as the turtle, is going to be a buffet for these guys. They eat a little bit of everything. They eat anything small and furry. So voles, moles, shrews, mice, rats, all those kinds of things. So they're going to help keep garden pests down as you go. But they will also eat birds and eggs, baby squirrels, frogs, other snakes. So there's a mix of pros and cons to having them in your yard. They're going to do a great job, again, of keeping a lot of those pest species down for you. They can also be very shocking when they sit there and look at you and you almost step on them and they do nothing about it. One of the things to keep in mind for these guys as they're moving around in your new garden space, I know somebody mentioned deer and deer-resistant planting. I know one of the big things that people try to do is protect your baby plants with a lot of that garden netting to keep the deer out, to keep them from eating those things. We admit probably around 10 or so, if not more, snakes every year that get tangled in that garden netting. So if you are going to use it, if you absolutely have to use that, make sure it is nice and tight. You don't leave bundles of it on the ground. That is an invitation for mice and things to use it as a hiding spot, and these guys then go in there chasing after those kinds of things. We would recommend using sturdier garden netting that maybe has larger holes that they can get through. So what happens is these guys go in, and especially for the rat snake, I know it's a little difficult to tell, but he widens in the middle. So he's a little thinner in the front, and then he gets pretty thick here in the middle, and then his tail tapers off again. So they end up making it only a part of the way through and then realizing they can't get any further. And then they try to either back up or they struggle a lot, and it starts to constrict on their body. So if you find a snake who's tangled in garden netting, the best thing to do is to take him to a rehabilitator who will be able to safely remove him from the netting and treat any wounds that they might have gotten from that. This is just one of many species of snake that you might find in your garden. We have several different species that live here in Virginia. I think there's something like 30 species of snake that live in Virginia, and it is likely that you might find probably at least half of them in your woodland area. These especially, though, they're also an arboreal snake. So these horizontal bars here on the end, don't turn your body, that's cheating. Those horizontal scales here on his belly, they are able to open those up, open a gap underneath them, and hook that onto textured surfaces. So they're able to climb they're able to climb trees, houses, brick, anything with a texture that they can kind of get a grip on. So always make sure that you are again, aware of that as you're going along, so that you're not thinking that, oh, this birdhouse that I put 30 feet up in a tree is safe. Absolutely not. He could get in that. And just to be aware, if you open a birdhouse, there might be a snake inside. Been there, done that. And again, the pros and cons of having this great habitat that you're building is that the animals are going to come and meet you there. So Slim has been with us for a little while now as well. He was caught on a glue trap in a house. So they are perfectly happy to live in and around people as well. So not only are they going to be out in woodland areas, but they're perfectly happy around people. So even if you live in an urban or suburban area where you're like, surely I won't have snakes, there's a lot of people and houses here, you are going to still see these guys. They are pretty comfortable around people. So that's how he came into us. I do absolutely love talking about snakes. They have so many great features. They have, the way their head is constructed, they have a specialized bone that connects one side of their jaw to the other and allows them to open their mouth really wide up and down. They also have a split and a loose area in their top and bottom jaw that allows them to open their mouth really wide side to side. So this is what allows them to eat that wide variety of food. They can swallow food that is 3 times the size of their head. These guys also grow depending on how much food that they get. If they live in a really food-rich area, they're going to grow pretty big, pretty fast. If they have to struggle a lot for every meal that they get, then there is always the possibility that they're going to stay a little bit smaller. Their average length is about 7 feet. He just hit 6 feet as of this year. So he's a lot longer than he looks. I know he's all curled up, but they can also reach up to 10 feet, again, if they live in a really good area. They do have a juvenile patterning that is very close to the copperhead, which is one of the venomous snakes in Virginia. And this is designed to protect them when they are younger, to help them avoid being eaten by predators. Again, they're pretty small, like the turtles. They're small and independent. At birth, they hatch out of the egg fully knowing what they're supposed to do, and they don't really have anybody to protect them. So making sure that that they have their own kind of built-in protection is the best way for them to survive. If you are interested in the other species here, we do recommend checking out the Virginia Herpetological Society. The other states and areas might have those as well, and those should give you pretty good descriptions and pictures of the snakes that you might find in your area. So I am hoping that all of you here, by building these wonderful habitats, also have an interest in wildlife and won't ever say, well, I can have any wildlife but not snakes. But if you are concerned about a snake species that you have found, to do a little research and make sure it's one that you have to worry about. Here in Virginia, all snakes can bite. This is important. They do have teeth, and biting is any wildlife's easiest way to quickly defend themselves against a potential predator. So it's always good to avoid that if you can. If you're building a space, you shouldn't need to pick up and move them again unless they are caught somewhere. If you need to climb that ladder and he's tangled on it. Generally, once they know that they're found, they're not going to want to hang out with you. They're not going to let you climb that ladder with them. Just kind of back up and go ahead and give them that space, and they should make a disappearance once they feel that it's safe to do so. But definitely, again, you can familiarize yourself with the different kinds of snakes that might move into your newly created space, to make sure that you and your family and everybody is safe around the animals. So as much as we do love our wild neighbors and we want everybody to respect it, we also want people to be safe. We're not saying that if all of a sudden you become a den to the copperhead, there's nothing you can do about it. I'm sure there are definitely things you can do about it, but just to be aware, you're not going to be able to dictate to wildlife who gets to live in your beautiful space. So that is definitely something to remember. All right, go ahead and get our. Oh, good job. You let me go quite quickly. Sometimes he hangs on. All right. So bring out our next. Let me turn this a little bit and get his buddy. See if he just wants to come and sit on his stand or not. Speaking of someone who should definitely be up right now. And then there, can you guys see him? Let me. What are you looking at, man? He doesn't know. We'll give him a minute to adjust. I can't tell. I am not the largest screen on my computer, so I can't tell if he's. There we go. He's in the shot. So this is Dopey. He is our eastern Screech Owl. He's a red-phased eastern Screech Owl. They also come in gray. Here, there's also a western Screech Owl that looks very similar, but has different coloring. Dopey has neurological issues. He hit his head when he was a baby, and his brain has not developed properly, which is why he is literally staring at nothing right now. He's actually staring at a button on my shirt for absolutely no reason. Oh, there we go. Got it? He's thinking about it. So this is definitely an animal that you might get in your beautiful woodland, and a really great reason for you to go ahead and keep those dead trees, those snags that Sari was talking about. So those are a great resource for these guys. They don't make their own nests, but they do they do use old woodpecker holes. So one of those things that snags are going to do, they're going to attract in insect activity, which is going to draw in those woodpeckers that are going to create these large holes. They might use them as nests themselves, or they just might end up beating a large hole into a tree that these screech owls could then go ahead and use. They will use them for both a home for themselves as well as nesting. And they generally prefer holes that are really just big enough to contain them, so that if they ever feel threatened, they can fill the opening with their sharp bits, their tiny, tiny beak, which is very sharp, and their talons, which are also very sharp. His are a little less sharp. He got a mani-pedi last week. Can you step up on there? There you go. So these guys, they are the smallest owl that lives in Virginia year-round. We do have a smaller species that comes to visit in the winter, but these guys do spend their the entire year here in Virginia. They eat a lot of insects because they're so small. They prefer what I call takeout. So they like to find small things that they can go out and grab and then take back to take back to a safe spot to eat. They probably only they fly shorter distances at a time, usually from hiding spot to hiding spot. So as you're putting in these shade trees, these bigger trees that you have, they're probably going to use those for those hiding spots. If you don't have dead trees for nesting, they might use those spaces. The coloration helps them determine which areas they want to hide in. Will you turn around? They turn you around when you stay there. There we go. People want to see your face. So one of the things, they do come in those two colors called phases, or morphs is another term to talk about it. So he is a red phase or a red morph. So these guys blend in really well against pine and cedar trees, that kind of more reddish bark. And the gray phase blends in really well with oak trees. So depending on the trees that you choose is going to determine the color of screech owl that you might have. So we want to make sure that if you're building, this is a great example. Sari mentioned that oaks are great for biodiversity. He's going to be one of those. Well, he's not because he's red, but we do have a gray phase as well that would. They blend in really remarkably with those, and they do like to sit. They are amazing hunters. They are perch hunters, so they like to sit still again and wait for food to walk by. Again, something small enough that they can go out and grab it and then go back to a safe space to eat it. One way you're not gonna really see these guys, you might hear them. They do make a very distinctive call. So if you have screech owls nearby, it is a whinny or a trilling noise. They do. So you might hear that a lot. You usually hear that more than you see them. Again, very small, very camouflaged. One way they're able to do this, if he'll let me, he's got these little groups of feathers on his head called ear tufts. And when they want to hide out, they get really tall and skinny. They put those ear tufts up and they close their eyes, which have feathers on their eyelids. And anybody casually, any animal or person casually walking or flying by, it looks like a broken branch. So they're very, very good at camouflage. But for an owl so small, they do make quite a lot of noise. Because they are small and snack size, they are, if you get larger owls that move into your woods, depending on how big of a space you end up creating, if you do invite larger owls in as your space gets bigger and your animals get bigger, you might lose these guys. So they're much better suited to these smaller spaces. Those larger owls also like a lot of edge habitat. Like Sari mentioned, they do like to have those trees that they can nest and hide in, but those big open meadowy areas are great attractants for small rodents, which larger owls, and these guys, if it's small enough for them to catch it, do love to eat. So you'll see them a lot. If you don't hear them, the other evidence you might have of owls living in your area are owl pellets. So these guys, their stomach acid is not strong enough to break down the entire, generally the entire thing that they eat. So any bones, fur, insect exoskeletons that they consume, their stomach can't actually break it down. So they break down what they can, digest everything that they can, and then they will package the rest into a pellet. So it's usually bones and fur, again, exoskeletons, and they group that all together and then they regurgitate it. And so you'll end up finding at the ground is usually where people recommend looking for evidence of owls, is to look on the bottom underneath of trees. And if you see a lot of pellets, then you know that an owl is using that spot. And that's a really great thing. I know a lot of groups, they have either ways to purchase owl boxes or plans to build owl boxes. They're not bad. They're not a bad thing to have. A lot of times they do get taken over by squirrels because they're great squirrel size as well. So be aware of that. And owls can be very picky about the height, the orientation. They don't like a south-facing box. And then you've got a squirrel that moves in. There's nothing you can do about it. So it's generally best to kind of let them choose where they want to be. And again, the best thing is to make sure that you have an established habitat. You can't say, I put in an oak tree and an owl box, where's my owl? There's no food there, there's no water there. It's going to be really hard to convince them to move from the territory they have. The same as the turtles, it's really hard to convince them to move from their beautiful territory that's all set up with food, water, and a hiding spot to the condo that you put up in a parking lot. So just kind of be aware of the space that you have. These guys are an animal that's going to come to a really well-established space. So don't be discouraged if you don't have owls after your first year of having a forest. It might take a little while for all of that ecosystem to kind of build up and the webs to really be there. But it's always a possibility. It's always a great thing that you can look forward to as things progress. You doing all right? There he is. Owls are excellent climbers. It's hard to see his feet, and he's being a little antsy tonight, but they have 4 toes like other birds, but what they're able to do is actually rotate their tiniest toe, their back toe, to the back, so they can have 2 toes in the front and 2 toes in the back like woodpeckers. And this is how they're able to get up. So don't worry too much if they have just a snag that's up in the middle and no branches on the route. If they can't fly in, they can climb in. It's actually really awkward to see them climb. So they use their feet, they use their beak, and then they flap their wings. So they kind of fly straight up a tree, and it's really fun to watch. What's really great about it too is that baby owls are able to do this. So once they're in what's called the brancher stage, where they're not quite flying yet, but they're pretty much fully grown skeletally, they might still have baby fluff. If you find them out of the nest, if you know where the nest is, either we can help you try to get them back, or you can give them a chance to get back up there themselves. So a lot of times they're able to manage that. All right, want to make space for our last friend? He's like, I got all comfy, and now you're, no, you want to stay on there? Okay. Stay there for a second. So bear with me for a second. I'm gonna kind of shift everything around, and the last guy's gonna be on this table as well. But I'm also going to take my computer, which is raised up down, so you can kind of look him straight in the face, because that's really the best way to meet him.
And while Jennifer's rearranging, I want to mention that we're about at time, but we still have more great stuff to show you. So if you need to bounce, that's fine. Please stick with us if you can. And we'll go a little bit over time just because there's so many great animals to share.
I've just got the last one, but he's really great, and I would hate for you guys to miss him. So this is an animal that you might see regardless of whether or not you manage a successful forest or not. This is Nigel, and Nigel is our male Virginia opossum. So these are the United States and Canada's only marsupial. So they do carry their babies in a pouch, and they are omnivores. As you can see, he just took a piece of cauliflower back into his lair. He doesn't want anybody else here to get a chance to eat it, even though I'm the only one who has that possibility. And I gave it to him. He's still very touchy about his favorite foods. These guys are pure omnivores. They eat everything, fresh stuff, dead stuff, live stuff. This is a really great addition to your woodland habitat. This is what's going to help with your woodland hygiene. You've got a lot of animals that are moving in. They're going to be leaving a lot of things behind. Owls might be leaving carcasses. You might end up, unfortunately, with animals that pass away just because they moved in, they're old. And one of these guys are nature's cleanup crews. So they will come in behind and help keep that area clean of rotting stuff that might be disturbing. So they're really, really helpful for those kinds of things. They're also fairly nomadic, so don't be upset if you see your opossum and he's gone the next day. They're fairly nomadic, and they do kind of wander around a generalized area, especially if they know that there is food and water there. So these edibles that you're planting, they might come back and have berries and things as they come into season, but they're fairly good at coming back around. One of the things that does happen a lot is you might find young opossums that don't know any better, lost in your brand new woodland. Our best advice, these guys again are marsupials. That means they carry their babies in a pouch on their stomach. And those babies stay in that pouch for 8 to 9 weeks before they're riding around on mom's back. Not usually independent until they're 10 to 12 weeks old. The best way to tell is to measure your hand. If a baby opossum from nose to butt is as long as your hand from the tips of your fingers to the heels, about 6 to 7 inches, you'll be able to tell that they are at that age, they're old enough to be on their own. They might be a little dumb, babies are, but they should be weaned and fully independent. If they're anything smaller than that, they should still be with mom and they've gotten separated. Due to their nomadic nature, they don't come back. So a lot of other animals that you might invite into your woodlands, the squirrels or even other mammals, foxes, raccoons, things like that, their babies can be renested or reunited. Birds, all of that can be renested or reunited. Anything born independent or opossums that get separated from mom, they may need care. And you can always go ahead and give us a call to get that. He loves grapes. He loves grapes. Oh, again, unlike wild species, all of our animals here are spoiled, and they get to eat all the fancy things. So he's got some oranges here on the table, some cat food. We do recommend another thing to pay attention is if you do feed wildlife outside, or if you or not wildlife, if you feed domestic animals outside, to make sure that you pull that food at night so that you're not giving these guys, you want them to eat your wild edibles, don't want them to eat the cat food on your porch. So after dark, pick up your cat food, and that should help keep them in your brand new forest that you built and not walking through the forest to come sleep on your porch. We do want to keep them out in the way. They'll also utilize any large trees that you have. They do like to use leaf piles to sleep in or to build nests and trees out of. So be aware, again, leaving all of that stuff, brush piles and nest and leaf piles will help a wide variety of animals. Don't touch the keyboard. Don't touch it. No, don't. He's gonna shut you guys off. So those are, yeah, he totally did. It's touching stuff. Stop it. So we appreciate you guys having us here, and we hope that you were able to connect some of the wildlife that you guys are going to see. I know that we're over time, but if anybody has any specific wildlife questions, I'm available to stay for a couple more minutes if anybody wants ask those if there was something that
Yeah,
the panelists
I'd
couldn't
say
answer.
go for that, right? Yeah. And by the
Yeah,
way, your latest ambassador has apparently several feline fans who have been commenting in the chat. We've got a couple cats watching. One ignored the webinar completely until the opossum came on, and then right on the screen. So fans of all species.
he draws the big crowds. He does.
So Jennifer, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm redoing my forested area. Basically, I live in a square, and there's woodland all around the square. And I'm trying to get out the autumn olive and so on and so forth. What kind of a habitat would somebody like Nigel like to see? I have a little tiny creek that runs through. Mostly it's wet when it's the rainy season, and it'll dry out occasionally. But there is a natural water source there along that line, and we have woods, and like I said, a lot of autumn olive. What could I do differently to help Nigel and his families feel at home?
I think just whatever you're going to put in. Again, these guys are they are both a wild and an urban species. They're perfectly happy living around people. Just making sure you have food and water sources. They're a higher up in a sense, so building those lower levels to draw in their food and water, their food sources is what's going to keep them around. So having plants with berries and other edible pieces is good for them. And that also draws in a lot of the things that they might eat, like mice, snakes. They'll also
mice,
eat.
trust me.
Yeah, and I'm sure they'll come down for them. They're not the best hunters. They are primarily scavengers, but if something's not fast, they'll absolutely get it. Bring in ground nesting birds, and they will raid. Bird nests, bunny nests, a lot of those things. So it's really just about building up those lower levels and giving them a water source is good, and again a space for them to go ahead and nest. So as long as they feel safe, kind of using that, they do nest a lot high up in trees. So I think it would depend on what kind of big trees that you have that they might be able to go up in.
Well, I got some pretty big oaks, and I also have a lot of like dead trees that I've let fall in the forest and rot naturally.
I mean, honestly, they might be there and you just don't see them. It's entirely possible that they're already there. A lot of the wildlife we have in this area, even if they are comfortable around people in terms of living there, aren't generally going to seek us out, especially if they have good places to hide. So they might be using that area.
I found one skeleton, and just this year, and then 2 years ago we had one going through the yard several times, and it met its end on a local highway. So I was sad about that. And I have seen raccoons. I just haven't seen very many possums.
And also raccoons are a pretty big bully, and if you've got a lot of them, they may not be letting the opossums establish there. Again, they're nomadic in that sense that they will stick to an area that has good food and water, but they're a very defensive rather than offensive creature. So if you've got raccoons coming in, the opossum is most likely to move on, because they're not gonna win a fight against a raccoon, so they're not probably gonna try.
Darn it. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
I loved your presentation. It's great. I also have an owl. Actually, probably at least two of them. One sits on one side of the square, and one sits on the other, and they do that whoo hoo hoo thing. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, if it's a call like that, if it's a who cooks for you all, that's a barred owl. So that's pretty awesome. We have one here in our woods.
Well, thank you all so much. We know that we could stay chatting about wonderful woodland animals and the plants that they love all night. but we hugely appreciate you all spending time with us and getting to know our organizations and our environments and both the flora and fauna. And we hope that you will remain involved. There are plenty of volunteer opportunities, both at Blue Ridge Wildlife Center and Sustainability Matters. You know, get involved as members, keep coming to our programs, talk to us on social media. Blue Ridge Wildlife Center has these incredible animals showing up on their social media as well. So we would encourage you to follow those and get their stories, and keep learning and, you know, keep making your own environment better, one plant and one animal at a time.